Different topic. David Pisoni, the Shadow Education Minister, has released some figures under Freedom of Information laws that show a third of students at our public schools are absent for 10 days or more every term. 47,000 students in public schools miss at least 8 weeks of their schooling every year. 28,000 miss the equivalent of a full term or more every year. That's around 10 weeks or so. He joins me now. David, good morning.
Good morning, Matthew.
Fairly disturbing figures. Were you surprised by this?
Well, I was surprised. I got the figures because obviously we're concerned about, Leon's been very diligent in his pursuit of truancy and obviously behaviour issues at school. And I was very curious to know just what was happening with attendance figures in school. So I put these FOIs in.
Why are they so bad?
Well, it's hard to understand, but the I think that the thing to remember here is that when David Gonski of the Gonski Review, part of his report, he actually did make the point that over the last 10 years, the gap between the lower socioeconomic students and Middle Australia in their learning outcomes had grown. So in other words, the poorer you are, the less likely you are to succeed in education. And if you look at these figures, they also tell you that if you're from a lower socioeconomic area, you're less likely to attend school. I mean, there are some of the figures are quite disturbing. I mean, Aldinga Primary School, now this is a primary school, 96% of students are missing for 2 weeks or more per term. 96% of them. There's 163 enrolled at the school, and the figures I've got from the department here tell me that in a single term, 157 students are enrolled, missing without reason at that school. Now, that's a staggering figure. Then at Fremont-Elizabeth High School, 62% of students with an enrolment of around about 900. You've got 550-odd who are missing for without reason, again, for 2 weeks or more per term.
So is it up to the school to ask the questions of these students' parents as to why they're not there? I mean, why is no reason given? Is that the parent not giving a reason or the school not obtaining one?
I think there's two issues here. First of all, I don't think the department is very efficient at letting parents know when their kids don't turn up. I've certainly experienced that in my office. I've had parents contact me concerned that they weren't aware that a child wasn't attending school for weeks at a time, and I've raised that with the schools concerned. And so there's that issue. Parents need to be made aware when their children don't turn up because they obviously can't manage the situation if they're not aware of it. And with both parents working or single-parent families with one of the parents working, I imagine at times it will be difficult. But at the same time, parents have a responsibility, of course, to ensure that their children go to school. It's quite disturbing that in some of the primary schools in the Elizabeth area, 28 to 40% of kids are not turning up to school without reason. So that's obviously parental involvement there. There seems to be a lack of interest in parents getting those kids to school because kids at that age generally don't make their own decisions. They're decisions that are made with their parents.
That's right.
And obviously, as kids get older, they might put their uniforms on in the morning, go to a mate's place or a friend's place and not go to school. And obviously the important thing there is that parents are told about that. I also would imagine that there are some parents that are simply not taking too much interest, and that concerns me. And there is a provision within the Education Act for the Minister to take action against those parents, and we haven't seen that happen under this government, and that's also concerning. But I think all principals...
just on that point, what does that action involve? Is it a fine? Is it ultimately, can it be a jail term if it's significant and ongoing? And what is it?
Well, there's a legal process that the department can instigate in order for these parents to be held accountable. So, but I think there's a wide range of reasons, and when you consider that our NAPLAN scores have got worse year by year, since 2008, we've gone backwards every year, particularly in our government schools and particularly in those schools that have had these high absentee rates. And then Jay Weatherall as Education Minister and now Minister Portalese as Education Minister have been blaming our poor NAPLAN results for our high proportion of lower socioeconomic students. And yet they're allowing this situation to continue.
So it could be the fact they're not at school learning, basically, as a result.
Well, they're not engaged, Matthew. They're not engaged. And I think this government brought in legislation to make it compulsory for kids to stay at school at 16 and they need to be at school or in learning or working to the age of 17. But it's obvious that they haven't been engaging those kids. So they've been using these statistics and these new laws that they've passed as suggesting that they're focusing on education. But what we now see is that sure they've changed the law and sure the enrolments might be up. But we're not seeing these kids attending school. We're not seeing these kids engaged.
All right, David, hold the line there. Grace Portalese, the Education Minister, I think, is in Cabinet, but Garry Costello, Head of Office for Schools at the Department of Education, is on the line. Garry, good morning.
Hi, Matthew. How are you?
Good. So these figures must concern you as well as in the department, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely they do.
What are you doing about it?
Well, there's a number of things happening. Part of the issue, I think, is too that we've got some processes that are probably not quite as tight as they ought to be. One of you'll notice the things that were put at, I'm in a school at the moment actually, visiting a school, so I've only just had a quick look at the advertiser, but one of the things that's happening there that's making things look worse than they are, and I'm not pretending that they're where they wanted, but the figures are where we want them to be because they're not. But one of the things that is happening in some of those schools is that kids are coming late for home group when attendance is actually taken, and then they're actually going to classes later in the day. So we need to get a system. Some schools are using programs where they are doing this, where they're actually marking attendance at every class, whereas not every school is doing that. And we've got a new portal coming in, new technology coming in, the LearnLink project, which we would hope will be in place before the end of this year, which will allow schools, particularly secondary schools, because this is a bigger issue in secondary schools, allow them to keep more accurate records of it.
So basically you're saying they could be there for most of the day, but they're just running late at the start and they're marked as being absent.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, but it would be dishonest to say that's the whole problem because it isn't. I think what David Pisoni is saying has some truth to parts of it too, that we do need to get the attendance up to a higher level. One of the things that's happening, and I think it's actually due to go out today or tomorrow, but I'm not in my office, I'm out in schools all day for the next 4 days, but we are putting processes in place to work with principals and regional directors and assistant regional directors to focus on how we do get our processes right around attendance. And part of that as well will be to have a really close look at all of the processes that we have around suspension and inclusion, because all of the things that keep kids out of school are things that we need to address. And
Garry, does the department have the resources to follow up with parents when, obviously, with some of these terrible stats that, obviously some kids are absent for 10 days or more, a third absent for 10 days or more every term, then are you following it up with parents? Do you need more help to do that?
I think we've got processes that could do with some refinement, but every school, Matthew, has to have an attendance action plan, every school. And I'm saying this as someone who has reasonably recently been a principal in a fairly large, complex school with 1,100 kids in it, secondary school. And it is a complicated process at times. For example, I have highlighted the fact that sometimes they'll be there for class but not there for home group. We still need to address that. But I'm not pretending that that is the whole problem. There are, in fact, significant issues in some schools where there are too many students not at school. But can I just paint a little bit of a picture, not trying to offer an excuse because we need to get them there, but there are some significant number of students, particularly as they reach their middle years of schooling, who have roles as carers within their family. That they're a hidden number of students who often they show up as being unexplained absence because they're actually the carer in the family. We also have significant issues with family dysfunction, where we've got, if you notice, some of the issues around attendance will tend to correlate a little bit with our more disadvantaged schools. So we have to make sure that we get our support systems right there. And the department has put some extra attendance officers, an extra 12 in across the state this year, to try to deal with this problem. And there will actually be a memo totally unrelated to this business. We've been working on this for the last 5 or 6 weeks to get a memo out to all of our principals and regional directors. It's due to go out this week, talking about some forums we're going to hold with principals and regional directors right across the state to look at how we can work better together to get our kids to be at school, because the point that was made by the previous speaker about the limitations that we place on the success of children if they're not at school is a completely valid one.
Gary, the text system that you use to alert parents when children don't show up, are you satisfied that's working well?
I think in the schools that it's working in, I think it works fairly well, Matthew. In the school that I was principal in, we did put that in place. There'd be a text message that would go out to every parent. Now, that's dependent, of course, on the parents having a mobile phone, but the majority, of course, do. One of the issues, but we do feel generally that is working fairly well, so that the parents often respond to text messages. I mean, that's kind of a cultural thing that happens in our society, that people do respond to text messages fairly immediately. So I think that has worked reasonably effectively in most places which are using that, Matthew.
The reason I asked that, Gary, is Mark Fortunatow, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, from MGM Wireless, and they provide that text messaging service, joins me now. G'day, Mark. Thanks for your time.
Good morning.
Are you happy it's working well from your point of view?
Well, I would support the comments made by Garry and by David that attendance is a complex issue, but it's essential to engage the parents and make them aware that their kids are not at school as the very first step. And what we're seeing, having worked with many, many hundreds, with almost 1,000 schools that we have our systems into to assist schools in communicating to parents about non-attendance, that is essential. And there's still, unfortunately, there are many schools out there that don't inform parents in a timely manner, or let alone at all, that their kids aren't at school. And unless that happens, quite frankly, I think no matter what programs and case management processes we put in place, it's not going to help. And that's where text messaging is. It really works well, and it really, in today's society where everybody has a mobile phone, there's no excuse now for not telling parents that their kids aren't at school on the day.
So what else needs to happen? What do you need to do to get those schools involved, or is it a matter for the department?
Well, I think it's probably a matter for both schools and the department. It's interesting. One of the biggest excuses or reasons that schools provide us with that they don't want to put a system like ours in is they're saying that parents prefer to get a phone call, which is really not the case at all. We've recently released a new system that enables the school to have our system for free, and it is free because parents agree to pay a small charge on their mobile phone to receive text messages. And we have been overwhelmed, staggered by the response we're getting from that. We're getting up to 900,000 parents a day contacting us saying we'd like to have the system in our school, and we're prepared to pay for it.
Did you say 900,000, or do you mean 900 to 1,000?
900 to 1,000, yes. Yes, which are huge numbers, through our website. So parents want it. There's actually, there's no... It's unequivocal that parents want a service like this.
Garry, just let me ask you that. Why aren't you rolling this out, insisting this be rolled out to all schools?
There's a number of schools that are using it. I mean, this is obviously a commercial product, and there's a number of them around. And I think we don't know the numbers who are actually using it, but we estimate it's probably about 40 or 50 of our schools who are. And currently what happens is that it's an individual site decision made generally by the administration of that school in connection with their governing council, so it's up to them to make the decision, because currently what happens is that it's up to schools to carry the cost for that. And while we recognise that it is a good system, we also recognise that the absolutely fundamental thing that we need to do is to work very, very closely with our families. That can be that SMS messaging system can be part of that, but a lot of it is to knowing your families, making them welcome in the school, phoning them, and a number of schools, of course, in fact, the vast majority of our schools do have these kinds of approaches.
And those sorts of things are niceties, the making them welcome and all of that, but ultimately that doesn't guarantee the kid's going to turn up, especially as he becomes older and, heads off to school by himself or herself.
That's quite true, but we do have a pretty good record of success where we get those processes right. And I think the messaging system, I'm not denying that the schools that make an assessment of their own situation and they find that is going to be helpful, we encourage them to go ahead with it. But that is very much a local school decision to go about it that way.
Right.
We're hoping that the new Learn Link project that we set up, which will allow much closer monitoring, particularly in secondary schools as they move across half a dozen different teachers in a day, that will acknowledge that will help us improve it as well. I guess the thing that I do want to keep mentioning, because all of us have, is that it's a very, very complex problem. We want to be supportive of our parents, but we also want them to be supportive of us. This has to be a partnership. Ultimately, the parents have a responsibility to make sure that the right thing is done by their children. We acknowledge that some of them are in extremely difficult circumstances with their mental health, with a whole range of other issues that they're dealing with. And so we're trying to make sure that we're sensitive to that, but at the same time be increasingly firm about the expectation that the children are at school.
Mm-hmm. Garry, David Pisoni still on the phone. Are you satisfied enough of that is being done?
Well, look, not really. I mean, the department nor the minister have a very good history on supporting parents, principals that want to make a difference. And I'll refer the listeners to Cooper Petey Primary School. There we've got 48% of students that don't turn up without reason, 2 weeks or more each term. The principal, they got a new principal in who was taking it very seriously, and there were a number of parents that weren't happy with how serious that she was taking that, and she was eventually removed by the department for her own safety. There was no support for her at all. She's now back in Adelaide teaching at another school.
And I understand taking legal action as well. Garry, what's your response to that, just briefly?
I think there are a whole range of issues involved in that situation. I don't know that it was as simple as matters around attendance. But our view would be, I don't think I'm differing vastly from David on this, is that our view would be that we do need to take a very firm and supportive, similarly firm and supportive position around parents, recognising the complexities of the lives of the families of people, and particularly in low SES communities. But we can't have a situation where those children are not coming to school.
Absolutely, no, that's the bottom line, and that's where everyone, I think, but especially you, need to work a lot harder, I would say, Garry. And
you're quite right, Matthew.
Your support of the figures would back that up.
And I'm quite happy for you to have a look at the stuff that we put out to our schools over the next little while too, because it is a big responsibility that I have and that everyone in our department has, and I'm not resiling from that at all. I quite openly accept the fact that we have to get our attendance rates up. I think you're quite right to be scrutinising this.
All right. Garry, thanks for your time today, and David Pisoni, Mark Fortunatow as well. Garry from the Education Department, David Pisoni, Shadow Education, and Mark from MGM Wireless, where they put out those text messages to schools. 10:24.